When judges and rulers are fair, let them do their job. Justice is achieved.
The third caliph of the Abbasi rule, Al-Mahdi, was looking for a pious, knowledgeable Islamic jurist whom he could appoint for the position of chief judge in the city of Kufa. He was told about a man who possessed all of the said qualifications, a man who feared none save Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His name was Sharik ibn Abdullah. The caliph summoned him and then said to him when he came, I indeed want to appoint you for the position of chief judge in Kufa. Sharik said, I certainly do not want to become a judge ever. Deeming it his right to pursue the matter further, Al-Mahdi asked, Why? Sharik answered, I fear that I will make a mistake in one of my judgments, for I am, after all, a mere man, and I fear that as a result of that mistake, Allah will admit me into the hellfire. I also fear that if I issue a ruling against a leader or governor, my ruling will not be executed. Al-Mahdi said, You know that if you strive to judge by the truth, but you then make a mistake, Allah will not hold you accountable for it. Rather, He will only hold you accountable if you judge unjustly on purpose, or if you judge, again, on purpose, by other than what Allah has revealed. As for the execution and application of your rulings, I promise you that all of your judgments will indeed be executed, even if one of them is against me. If one such as you, righteous Islamic jurists, do not agree to become judges, then who will take upon themselves such responsibilities? Would you like for the ignorant ones, unjust ones, or deviant ones to become judges? The sin of that happening will be upon you, based on the fact that you will have, in that case, fled from applying the truth. These arguments were too strong for Sharik to ignore them, and so he decided to accept the appointment of becoming chief judge of Kufa. The governor of Kufa at that time was Musa ibn Isa, the uncle of the Caliph Al-Mahdi. Every morning, Sharik would go to the courthouse and judge between the litigants that came before him. True to the hopes of the Caliph, Sharik was a very competent and just judge, and in regards to his ruling, he feared none but Allah. Sharik remained untroubled until he had to deal with a special case, the details of which are as follows. Situated on the shores of the Euphrates River in Kufa was a beautiful garden. It was owned by a resident of Kufa. One day, the governor of Kufa, Musa ibn Isa, decided that it would be nice to own that garden, especially since it was located right beside his castle. He made an offer for the property, but the owner refused to sell it. When the owner died, the garden then became the joint property of his children, a number of sons and one daughter. Having failed to secure the purchase of the property from its previous owner, Musa ibn Isa went to the new owners and gave a generous offer to buy the garden. All of the sons of the previous owner were willing to sell the garden, but the daughter refused, despite the fact that Musa ibn Isa offered a huge sum of money, an amount that was much more than what the property was actually worth. And in spite of the daughter's refusal, the sons sold their shares to the governor. To protect her share of the garden, the young woman built a fence around it. Not satisfied at all by having part of the garden and not all of it, Musa ibn Isa decided to take the young woman's share of the property by force. He gave some instructions to his guards, who then proceeded to destroy the fence that the young woman had built. The young woman then went to the courthouse and presented her case before Sharuk, who ordered that the governor should present himself in his courtroom so that he could hear what both the plaintiff and the defendant had to say. As governor of Kufa, Musa ibn Isa felt insulted by the request. For why should he dispute a case with a mere common woman? Musa ibn Isa sent his chief guard to go in his place, ordering him to convey the following message to the judge. How can you accept the claim of a woman when she has no witnesses with her? Sharuk looked angrily at the governor's representative, and after hearing the message he came with, Sharuk said, "Why are you here when this matter has nothing to do with you? I requested the governor to come and not you. Therefore, your punishment is temporary imprisonment." The judge gave instructions to his guards, who then proceeded to arrest the governor's representative and to put him into prison. When the governor found out what had happened, he sent some of Kufa's leaders to the judge in order to try to reason with him and appease his anger. After they introduced themselves to him in his courthouse, they said, "The governor must not be treated like a common man. Rather, he must receive special treatment that is in keeping with his position and status." Sharuk said, "Before the law, all people are equal. As for you, you have interfered with the law, and the punishment for that is temporary imprisonment." Again, Sharuk gave instructions to his guards, who then arrested the men and put them into prison. When Musa ibn Isa found out what had happened, he had finally had enough. And so he forthwith set out with some of his men. They went together to the prison and released all those who were imprisoned by the judge for interfering with the case. The prison guards, who really couldn't do anything to stop the governor, went to Sharuk to tell him what had just occurred. He exclaimed, "I did not seek out to be a judge. Instead, it was the caliph who coerced me into taking the job, which I only accepted based on the condition that all of my rulings will be executed." He gathered his paper, his books, and his personal possessions, and then climbed his mount in order to head towards the capital city, Baghdad. When the governor found out that the judge was leaving, he became very afraid, for he knew that if the caliph were to find out what had happened, he would fire him from his post as governor, regardless of the fact that he was the caliph's uncle, and that it was why he rode out to catch up with the judge before he got too far. He caught up with him on the outskirts of Kufa, and when he reached him, he pleaded with him to return to Kufa, and he promised to fulfill all of his requests. Sharuk said, "I will not return until all of the prisoners return to prison and until you present yourself in my courtroom in order to plead your case against the woman who owns the garden." Having no other realistic option in the matter, the governor accepted all of the judge's terms. The prisoners returned to prison, and the governor presented himself at the courthouse. When both the plaintiff and defendant were finished presenting their cases, Sharuk ruled in favor of the woman, ordering the governor to rebuild her fence and to abstain from any future attempt at forcing her to sell her share of the property. The governor accepted his ruling and quickly complied with its terms. When all was said and done, Sharuk ordered for the prisoners to be released from jail. Later on, in what perhaps seemed to be an awkward meeting for the governor, Sharuk went to him and extended greetings of peace to him. Sharuk then said, "Do you now order me to do anything?" Seeing the surprised expression on the governor's face, Sharuk said, What happened before had to do with a right in the Sharia, and my coming to you now has to do with the rights of good manners.
True to his word.
History most often remembers only one aspect, albeit a dominant one of an important person's personality. The first-century ruler, Al-Hajjaj, is no exception. All of his qualities are overshadowed by the one characteristic that he is remembered for today, his tyranny. Not necessarily against everyone, but at least against those who spoke out or rebelled against him. One day, a group of rebels were captured and brought before Al-Hajjaj. After a perfunctory review of their cases, he ordered that each one of them, save one, should be executed. As for the one who remained, Al-Hajjaj was reviewing his case when the call for prayer was made, leaving no time for the man's case to be judged that day. And so, Al-Hajjaj turned to Qatiba ibn Muslim and said to him, "Keep this man in your custody and bring him to me tomorrow morning." Qatiba left the ruler's court, taking the prisoner along with him. As they were walking in the streets of the city, the man turned to Qatiba and said, "Do you wish to do a good deed?" "And what is it?" asked Qatiba. "I have valuable things that people have kept with me as a trust, and as you know, your ruler will soon have me killed. Release me now and allow me to return to my home, so that I can bid farewell to my family and return the things that were entrusted to me to their rightful owners. Also, so that I can update my final will and testament. And Allah is the guarantor for me to return to you tomorrow." Amazed at the man's words, Qatiba began to laugh. The man was not discouraged, however. Instead, he repeated his request and gave extra stress to the words, "Allah is the guarantor for me to return to you." On the spur of the moment, and without really knowing why, Qatiba said, "Go." After the man had left and was out of sight, Qatiba felt as if he had just woken from a state of heedlessness, and he began to have many doubts about allowing the man to go. He then exclaimed, "What have I done?" He returned home to his family and endured a long, sleepless night. But no sooner was it morning than he heard a knocking at his door. When he opened the door, he was happy to see that his prisoner was true to his word and had actually returned. At first, he didn't believe his eyes, and so he exclaimed, "You have returned." The man said, "I made Allah my guarantor, and you think that I should not then return?" They both went together towards Al-Hajjaj's court, and when Al-Hajjaj saw them and saw the tired yet strange look in Qatiba's eyes, he knew that something had happened. Upon Al-Hajjaj's request, Qatiba gave him an account of the events that took place the day before and that morning. Perhaps it was because Al-Hajjaj was impressed by the man's trustworthiness. Perhaps it was because he was impressed by Qatiba's trust in Allah. Or perhaps it was because he was moved by the action of both men. Whatever the reason, he turned to Qatiba and said, "Release your prisoner, for he is free to go." When both Qatiba and the prisoner were standing outside of the ruler's court, the former said, "Go wherever you want." Almost as if he were ignoring Qatiba, the man raised his gaze towards the sky and said, "O Allah, all praise is for you." Without saying a single word of thanks to Qatiba, the man left. Having trusted the man when perhaps no one else would have done the same, Qatiba, to be sure, felt somewhat disappointed at their parting. After all, a simple gesture of gratitude would have been sufficient. But on the following day, the man returned to Qatiba and said, "May Allah reward you with the best of rewards for what you did for me. By Allah, while we were together yesterday, I was not unmindful of what you had done for me. Yet I said nothing of that to you, for I indeed disliked that I should, with my praise, associate any partners with Allah."
Is not goodness the reward of goodness?
Imam al-Qadi Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Abdul Baqi al-Ansari, may Allah have mercy on him, used to live in Mecca. Having gone without food for longer than was comfortable for him, he became extremely hungry, but had nothing with which he could fend off his hunger. As he was walking through the streets of Mecca, thinking about his predicament, he found a silk bag that was tied by a silk string. After he picked up the bag, Imam Abu Bakr took it to his house. There he opened the bag and found in it a pearl necklace, the likes of which, in terms of beauty and quality, he had never before seen in his entire life. But if he felt any joy at having found such a valuable thing, that joy was short-lived. For when he went out into the street, he came across an old man who was announcing that he had lost a silk bag that contained a valuable necklace. The old man said that there was a reward of 500 dinars for the person who returned the bag and the necklace. Many others who are put through a similar test fail, especially those who are poor and for whom the temptation of a valuable item is simply too much. But not so for Imam Abu Bakr, who instead of reflecting on his own situation, took the old man back with him to his house and asked him to describe the bag, the string, the pearls, and the string to which they were attached. The old man, of course, gave an accurate description of everything, after which Imam Abu Bakr took out the lost items and gave them to him. The old man immediately took out 500 dinars and tried to hand them over to Imam Abu Bakr, but he refused to take the reward, explaining that it was a religious duty upon him to return the lost items, and that, therefore, it was not befitting for him to take a reward for having fulfilled that duty. The old man continued to insist for a while, but Imam Abu Bakr was adamant in that he was not going to take the money. The old man then took his leave and went on his way. Shortly thereafter, Imam Abu Bakr, perhaps seeking out a new life and a new means of gaining sustenance, left Mecca and became a passenger on a sea vessel. During his journey, the ship began to sink, and as a result, many people died, and their wealth went with them to the bottom of the sea. The ship was breaking into pieces, and with a great deal of difficulty, Imam Abu Bakr managed to hold on to one of those pieces and thus remain afloat. He continued to hold on to the broken piece for a long time, and when he finally reached an inhabited island, he could not tell how many days he had spent all alone in the sea. As a newcomer to the island, he did not know anyone, and needing a place to rest and recuperate, he sat down in a masjid. While he was seated in the masjid, reading the Quran, many people heard him and approached him, asking him to teach them the Quran. He was all too happy to teach them, and as a reward for his services, they paid him a significant amount of money. Later on, he found papers on which was written chapters of the Quran. He finally found an opportunity to read directly from the Quran instead of reciting from memory. Apparently, at least most people on the island were illiterate. Foreseeing that he could read, a throng of people approached him and asked him if he was able to write. He answered in the affirmative, and they said, "Teach us how to write." They then brought to him children of all ages, and he became their teacher. And again, in return for his services, he was paid a handsome sum of money. Being pleased with both the character and knowledge of the newcomer, the leaders of the island approached him, saying, "Among us lives a young female orphan. She is rich, and we want you to marry her." At first, Imam Abu Bakr refused, but they insisted until he finally gave in and agreed to marry her. On the day of their marriage, the leaders of the island presented Imam Abu Bakr's new bride to him. With a look of utter amazement in his eyes, he began to stare at the necklace that she was wearing. So long did he stare at it that the leaders of the island said, "You are breaking the heart of this young orphan, for instead of looking at her, you are looking at her necklace." Imam Abu Bakr then told them of his story with the old man in Mecca. Everyone present began to pronounce the testimony of faith and to extol Allah's greatness. They were so loud that their voices could be heard by all of the inhabitants of the island. Imam Abu Bakr asked, "What is the matter with you?" They said, "The old man who took the necklace from you is the father of this girl, and he used to say, 'I have never found a true and sincere Muslim in the world except for the man who returned this necklace to me.' And he used to supplicate, saying, 'O Allah, bring me and that man together so that I can marry my daughter to him.' And now that has happened." Imam Abu Bakr outlived his wife and the children she bore him, inheriting the necklace and then selling it for 100,000 dinars. He remained a wealthy man to the end of his days.
Allah's countless favors.
The following story is related by a woman who, centuries ago, endured a difficult, though ultimately faith-increasing hardship. I was once a passenger on a sea vessel, and traveling with me were many businessmen. While we were in the middle of the sea, the winds became tempestuous, and our ship began to sink. Every passenger and crew member of the ship drowned except for 3, myself and my young child, for we both held on to a piece of wood that had broken off from the ship, and a black man who was holding on to another part of the boat that had broken off. It was during the night that the ship began to sink, so it was near impossible to see anything. But in the morning, the other survivors saw us and began to swim towards us, holding on with one hand to a piece of wood and struggling with the other in the water in order to reach us. Meanwhile, while holding on to my son, I was able to climb on the piece of wood that I was hanging on to. After a long struggle in the water, the man finally reached us and climbed on the piece of wood we were sitting on. I felt very much disconcerted when he then came and sat down beside me. When he then tried to seduce me, I said, "O slave of Allah, do you not fear Allah? We are in a difficult predicament, one from which we can little hope to escape. Even if we are obedient to Allah, what do you think then our chances are if we disobey Him?" He said, "Don't make me hear such words, for by Allah this is something that I must have." My child was sleeping in my lap at the time, and I stealthily poked him, hoping that he would wake up. He did wake up, and with a loud cry, I turned to the man and said, "O slave of Allah, please Give me a chance to put my child to sleep, and then after that, we can see what Allah has decreed for us." Instead of heeding my words, the man tore my son away from my lap and threw him into the sea. I raised my gaze towards the sky and said, "O one who is most capable of coming between a person and his heart, make something, by your might and power, come between me and this man. Indeed, you are upon all things capable." No sooner did I finish saying the last of those words than did a large sea creature rise above the surface of the water, open its mouth, and swallow the man who was about to try to rape me. It then plunged back into the sea, and Allah kept me protected from its jaws. Although one problem was solved, I was still stranded in the middle of the sea. The waves continued to propel me from one direction to another until I finally washed ashore onto an island. I remained positive and thought to myself, I will eat whatever I find here, and I will wait until Allah provides relief for me, for only He can bring me help now. 4 days passed, and I was struggling as best as I could to survive. On the 5th day, as if out of nowhere, a ship appeared. I climbed a hill and waved my arms frantically, signaling to the passengers of the ship that I need help. They saw me, and 3 of them climbed a small raft and came towards me. After they came and took me back to their ship, I looked around at the ship's passengers, and not believing my eyes, I saw my child sitting down with one of the men. I ran towards my child, embraced him, and kissed him between his eyes. I said, "This, by Allah, is my dear child." The people on the ship began to look at me as if I were a crazy woman, but I told them that I was perfectly sane. After which, I gave them an account of my story, concentrating on the events that led to the separation between me and my child. Each one of them, as he heard me tell my story, had a look of amazement in his eyes. One of them said, "You have told us an amazing story indeed, and we too have a story that will amaze you. While we were traveling in the calm waters of the sea, a large sea creature suddenly blocked our way, and on its back this child was seated. We know not from where a caller called out, saying, 'If you do not take this child from its back, you will be destroyed.' One of us climbed onto the back of the sea creature, picked up the child, and then took him back to the safety of the ship. As soon as our man returned to the ship with the child safely tucked in his arms, the sea creature plunged back down into the sea. We are truly amazed at what happened to us and at your story. We indeed make a pledge to Allah that after this day, He will not see us disobeying Him." Each one of the ship's crew members then repented for his past sins. How perfect Allah is indeed. He is indeed all-knowing, all-wise, most merciful.
A very special dream.
History books contain the mention of an amazing incident that took place in the year 557. At the time, the Abbasid dynasty was experiencing a sharp decline, as the lands of the Muslims became plagued by weakness and even chaos. Some Christians got together and plotted to remove the Prophet ﷺ's body from his grave and to transport it back to their own lands, and what would obviously be a serious blow to the morale of the Muslims. For this diabolical plot, they sent 2 men to Medina, both of whom disguised themselves in Moroccan garments and claimed to be travelers who came to visit the holy city. The two men stayed in a well-known house that was adjacent to the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. In order to blend in with their milieu, they performed acts of worship in a conspicuous manner, always hoping to be seen by others in order to gain their trust. But on the inside, they were plotting to achieve the task for which they had been sent. Having come up with a plan that, at least in their minds, was sure to work, they began to execute it. They secretly began to dig a tunnel from inside their house. And by continuing to dig, they hoped to eventually reach the Prophet ﷺ's grave. Every day, they would dig a little bit, placing the extra dirt in bags. They, of course, did not want to be seen by anyone when they would dispose of the extra dirt. And so, they would get rid of it while they would take their daily walk in Al-Baqi', the famous graveyard of Al-Medina. As they would walk through the graveyard, they would slowly pour out the dirt from underneath their cloaks. And all the while, they would be giving others the impression that they were visiting the graveyard in order to remember death and the hereafter. At times, they would also spill the excess dirt into a well that was near their home. After many days of secret toil, the two men were finally near the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. Feeling sure now that they would succeed in their mission, they began to concentrate their thoughts on concocting a plan to actually transport the Prophet's body to their homeland. But they could plot and plan as much as they wanted, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had other plans for them, and what He wills, He does. Far away from Medina, the ruler during that era, Nuruddin Muhammad ibn Zinki, saw a troubling dream. In that dream, he saw the Prophet ﷺ pointing to two men of red complexion and instructing Nuruddin Muhammad to protect him from them. Nuruddin Muhammad then woke up, both frightened and agitated. In order to calm his nerves, he stood up to pray, after which he went back to sleep. But during that night, he saw the same dream 3 times. When he woke up the 3rd time, he summoned for one of his ministers to come to him. That minister was Jamaluddin al-Mawsili, a wise minister who was a practicing righteous Muslim. When the ruler finished telling him about his dream, Jamaluddin said, "This is concerning something that is happening in Medina. Go now to the Prophet's city and keep secret what you have seen." For the remainder of that night, Nuruddin Muhammad made preparations to leave. 20 mounts were loaded and 20 men, one of them being Jamaluddin, made preparations to go with their leader. They made the journey from Asham, meaning Syria and surrounding regions, to Medina in 16 days. When they reached their destination, Nuruddin Muhammad went to Al-Rawdah, which is a special place in the Prophet ﷺ's masjid, and prayed. But as of yet, he had no idea what he should do about his dream. His minister, Jamaluddin, asked him if he remembered what the 2 people he saw in his dream looked like. Nuruddin Muhammad said that he remembered them clearly, and that if he were to see them now, he would certainly recognize them. Jamaluddin had a plan to apprehend the 2 men, and he immediately put it into action. When the inhabitants of Medina were gathered in the masjid, Jamaluddin made the following announcement. "Indeed, the ruler has brought with him a great deal of wealth that has been earmarked for charity. Have the poor ones among you register their names, and then bring them, so that each can take his fair share." While each person came to take a share of the handout, Nur-ad-Din Muhammad was standing right there, looking at each person, in the hope of seeing one or both of the men he saw in his dream. Many people came and went, but Nur-ad-Din Muhammad saw no one who resembled either of the two men. He then asked, "Is there anyone left who still has not taken his share?" Someone said, "There remains two men from Morocco. They refused to take their share, and indeed they are both very righteous." "Bring them to me," were the immediate words that came out of Nur-ad-Din Muhammad's mouth. When the two men were brought before him, Nur-ad-Din Muhammad immediately recognized them. They were the two men that the Prophet ﷺ pointed to in his dream. Nur-ad-Din asked them, "Where are you from?" They said, "We are from the West, and we have come here in order to perform Hajj. After we arrived, we decided to stay here this year." Perhaps their plot was not exactly clear to Nur-ad-Din at that moment, but he knew they were guilty of something. And so he continued to interrogate them, hoping that they would confess their crime, whatever it was. But they kept to their story, and with no proof against them, Nur-ad-Din couldn't justly take any steps against them. Nur-ad-Din then ordered for their home to be searched. After a thorough search, they found nothing peculiar save a large amount of money that the two men had stored in their home. As everyone began to file out of the two men's home, Allah guided Nur-ad-Din to look at the wooden floor. One of its boards was loose, and Nur-ad-Din stooped down to have a closer look. He realized that the board was not attached solidly to the floor, and so he picked it up. The people of Medina were shocked to see the entrance of a tunnel, and even more shocked to see where it led to, for they had been certain that the two men were righteous Muslims. After being beaten by the irate ruler, the two men confessed that they weren't really from the West, but were instead two Christians who had been sent by their leaders with a great deal of wealth that was paid to them up front for the job of removing the Prophet ﷺ from his grave and transporting the body back to their lands. Nur-ad-Din ordered for the two men to be executed and for the tunnel to be blocked up and filled with dirt. When these two orders were executed, he returned to Ash-Sham, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best.